I want to thank you all for giving me an opportunity to talk about this topic. It's not something that I expect we'll see changes in the near term, but I'm hoping that it's going to deliver great opportunities for us in the future. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, and in the slide deck, there's just a little bit of a disclaimer at the front end describing the fact that these are long view perspectives and that not necessarily everything is in place to allow for these features. And then I provided an acronym list for those that would appreciate that. I'm sure it comes in handy. Yesterday, Cindy talked a little bit about how long it takes to do things in this marketplace. I was at Boeing. I was the DER that signed off on the SATCOM and data link system for the FANS 1 certification. That's picture on your left side is actually on the cert flight where we demonstrated it for credit. And then on the upper right is where the signature actually got signed off. And then you can see Tom Kraft, if those of you that might remember Tom, and Dave Allen celebrating with a beer at the table. And that was kind of a fun time.
That's you with the white shirt?
I'm in the back on that one there, yeah. That's a few years ago.
So you're the guy with the dark beard?
Yeah, it's all gone now. I'm in a cherry blossom. I've become. Funny enough, though, we actually started work on SAT Voice before that, and Honeywell came to us with Honeywell with Raycal support, a voice-capable SATCOM system. We had certified the first data link with ACARS in 1990. By 93, we had a high-gain antenna on the airplane, and we could do voice. And they said, well, we'd like to bring it into the flight deck. And this was an entirely new proposition. We had no really advance notification on that. So we delivered that feature in 93. And in 94, we spun up a working group, RTCA-165, Working Group 5. We produced a couple of documents, DO-222 and DO-231, that describe sort of how to use SAT Voice in the near term. DO-231 expressed a desire for SAT Voice to be part of context management for the data link, so that when you negotiated your contract for a data link, you also negotiated the phone number, the contact number for the voice communications. And I don't know where that ever went, but it sure seems like a good idea, especially as you move towards direct controller pilot communications. We got approval to do urgent and distress calls. We invented the shortcode method. The issue is we published frequencies on charts, but we couldn't publish phone numbers because of the concern that it would create unwanted calls to facilities. And so we created a shortcode idea where Inmarsat would hold the directory privately, and they negotiated with all their traffic facilities what their actual phone number was to go into it. That was all in place really by the end of 93. So you have to appreciate when we're having these conversations 33 years later that it's frustrating to see how little on the voice side. We've moved along slowly but steadily on the data link side, but on the voice side it just seems to still be a little bit stuck at the beginning. So just thought you might appreciate a little of that. So I work with the Seamless Air Alliance. By the way, I don't work for any supplier of data link or communications. I don't build any equipment or anything like that. I am involved with a commercial thing where we measure in-flight connectivity quality of experience through a project called Viper, but that's my only sort of commercial side. Otherwise, I work on standards with the ARINC subcommittees, AWC, SE, ITC, and also at Seamless Air Alliance. One of our committees at Seamless has been looking at where is in-flight connectivity going. And what we've kind of recognized is we're in a series of waves of disruption. We lived in the geo world. We actually started promoting KU band geo terminals in 1999, and then 2001 came, and there was an event in 2001. I'm sure you all recall, which changed everything. And Connection by Boeing, and I was with Tenzing. We both suffered from that. Connection by Boeing eventually, folded, at least on the commercial side. And there was a renaissance in in-flight connectivity starting with the auction of 3.5 megahertz of spectrum that Gogo and JetBlue took. And Gogo built their business on that and then followed up later with SATCOM. Row 44 with Southwest Airlines, I think, really stepped forward on a big commitment toward having SATCOM. So the geostationary SATCOM business really took off in the late 2000s. And until about 3 years ago, that was the name of the game. And we saw satellites get bigger with a lot more capacity and smaller beams, and the beams allow you to do reuse, so you get a lot more capacity came into the mix, and Viasat, of course, was probably always at the lead of that with Viasat 1, the first, really big satellite, and they followed to Viasat 2. And they've had a little bit of issues with their Viasat 3 launches, but they're very impressive geo satellites. So that's where we were for 15 years, and then suddenly LEO broadband satellites came in. Of course, Iridium was around since for 20 years, but they're a narrowband service, not a broadband service. So OneWeb was really the first to the marketplace, but they unfortunately went bankrupt and had to kind of recover from that, and they're in much better shape now. They're under Eutelsat banner, and they've got probably 600 or 800 airplanes now flying OneWeb, and they're also becoming more popular in the business aviation side. But another player entered the marketplace, which was Starlink, and Starlink has taken the market by storm. This is a true market disruption. If you watch the commercial commitments by airlines, starting about a year ago, it's all Starlink. Everybody is committing to Starlink, and they're committing full fleets to Starlink, which is also unusual. A lot of airlines were just doing subfleets, and some carry 2 or 3 different providers. But we've got large airlines now committing their entire fleet towards that. While OneWeb has a compelling service, they haven't really been able to win anywhere near the business that Starlink has. So Starlink has really has changed the game. So this is the first wave of disruption. The second wave of disruption is just starting to begin, and that's with the entrance of additional LEO players, notably Amazon LEO, which will provide a large enough competition to Starlink that it's causing airlines to delay and wait for it. So we've already had a couple airlines step forward and say that they're going to go with Amazon, even though Amazon's not going to be here for a couple of years. They're not going to go with Starlink now. I think in our business, it's always good to have a couple of market players. You don't want to always have just one, because it can lead to some challenges. So that's the second wave of disruption, Horizon 2. That's where we start to see a split of the marketplace, where Starlink is kind of dominating today. In wave 2, we're going to see Amazon and OneWeb and Telesat Lightspeed. I don't want to forget them as well. There's a Chinese Thousand Sails constellation also coming into being, and no doubt there will be others. And so the market's going to kind of work through that, and it's going to be a little bit messy, I'll say, in that time frame. After a few years, that's going to settle down into a third wave of disruption. And that's really the wave that I'm trying to address in this talk. So everything I'm talking about here is really looking out 5+ years from now. It's not something that we would promote necessarily today. And what's big about that last stage is that we expect that airlines will install diverse KSAT systems on their airplane. They'll carry an Amazon and a Starlink, or a Telesat and a OneWeb. They won't carry just one provider, they'll carry 2. And the reason is, and I've got more slides that'll get into it, but I'll just give you a head up on it, is for airlines, they're becoming more and more dependent on this broadband pipe. It's not just for the passengers, it's become a factor in their operation itself. And so the loss of this connectivity becomes very disruptive to their operation, as well as to their passengers. There's also issues with coverage. There are certain geographic national borders that are kind of picky about who they allow to operate within it. So for example, China draws a fairly strong border, and we're not ever expecting, honestly, Starlink to ever be able to offer service in China. There's argument about whether you can overfly versus what happens on the ground. There's no question when a plane lands, you have to comply with the national rules. Starlink, I will say, has taken a kind of a liberal view on this, and in a number of cases will continue to operate even though they don't have rights over that nation because they're not landing, they're overflying. And that's just another conversation I don't even want to get into because I can't really defend it, but there it is. But the bottom line is if you want to have a reliable connection across all of the coverage that your flight routes might take you, it might take more than one terminal to do it. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing to support that, and I'll kind of get into that now. By the way, the geo world has sort of paused. We used to have a lot more launches in the geo side. They're not happening anywhere near as much as they did in the past. There are sort of small sat geo initiatives that are forthcoming that look really interesting, and particularly with the larger launchers that we're getting, like New Glenn and Starship. They allow much bigger satellites to be launched, not unfurlable arrays, but hard arrays, which allows it to be much cheaper. And so we expect that there's going to be a renaissance on GEO with much lower cost satellites that can provide very high bandwidth solutions. So GEO is not really going away, it's transforming. It's going to have to respond to this market pressure. It has a particularly good ability to concentrate capacity in a given location. The thing about LEO is it's a bit of a peanut butter approach. It doesn't really have the ability to put massive amounts of capacity into one location. We're talking like over airports and things like that. Although companies like Starlink are launching more and more satellites that can amass a substantial amount of capacity, but ultimately they have hard limits, whereas GEO can overcome those limits. There's a lot of data that can be moved over GEO that has no effect on the quality of experience also. So you can blend your data communications, use your low latency link for certain types of transactions, and you use your high latency link for other kinds of transactions. Streaming video, which takes something like 70% of the bandwidth of the internet today, works perfectly fine over GEO. There's no issue at all with it. So if you want to unload your LEO network, take 70% of the traffic off, you can send it over GEO and leave all your transactions on the LEO side. So this is a chart from Novaspace. It's just showing that the amount of capacity that's being launched that's available to like connectivity is growing dramatically, and the percent that we actually are used is shrinking because of that increase in capacity. Next slide. There's a technology evolution that's happening as well. Those of you that might recall in the older days of cellular, we had different cellular phones for different cellular networks. This goes back to the original American mobile phone standard and Verizon when they had their CDMA networks, and Nextel had their network, and Japan had their network, and so you would have to carry a different phone depending on which network you were going into. GSM came into the mix, and by 3G GSM, the marketplace converged. And so kind of going forward from that point, when you get your handset from Apple or Android equipped or whatever, the chipset in there is designed to support 3GPP standards, and then across the marketplace, they all support that as well. The only issue is what frequencies, what bands you have in support. Sometimes that's an issue. But the bottom line is we no longer have this requirement to carry a bespoke terminal, if you will, with your handset, depending on what network you have. So you can just put a SIM card in to any phone and it becomes your phone. You don't have to really do much about it. On the SATCOM side, we're still back in the American mobile phone standard world where everybody has their own homegrown modem. iDirect and Galat and Hughes and Viasat, they all build their own modems. They're all customized in a large way, not just the signal in space to try to get the most bandwidth out of the signal, but there's a lot of network management and frequency coordination and things like that that get wrapped up into it. As a result of that, on board the aircraft, if we have to support a terminal that operates across different networks, we have to carry a different modem for each one of those networks. And we do that today. But with the advent of non-terrestrial networking, NTN, there is a convergence of satellite connectivity, if you will, using a 3GPP modem. And I'm sure you have heard about the Direct Device Initiative. Apple started it with working with Globalstar. Starlink is now moving into it, and I'm going to show you what this really means. But the mobile network operators that provide your cellular networks, they have to put base stations in to provide coverage. There's a lot of areas where they don't have base stations, so they have gaps in that coverage. I live in the state of Washington. A large amount of Washington does not have cellular coverage. It's really astonishing. I can say that this room doesn't have very good cellular coverage, nor I had a lot of trouble with the Wi-Fi. So anyway, so the idea of space-based overlay of connectivity is really attractive because it can fill out that capability. Starting out with narrowband messaging applications, but it's expected to transform into voice and to some degree, some data capability. There's several companies really pushing into this area. AST Space Mobile is a big one, Link is another, but Starlink has really taken this to heart. And so for the direct-to-device world, what we're seeing is a vision that was started really, if you go back to the original Iridium, which by the way I was a part of, we had a Kyocera handset that had GSM and satellite built into that handset, and you could have to go outside, of course, to use the satellite side. And we always, that was a downside of SATCOM. You had to be outside to do it, but it was a combined SATCOM and GSM phone. With the NTN standards coming forward, this becomes a satellite phone natively. It's not like you're adding anything to it. So that's a big initiative. Direct-to-device is kind of the term that people address it, and it's a huge market, and I'll get to a slide in a second. But there's another side to that, and that is for the airplane, how can we use NTN? And so instead of carrying an iDirect, Viasat, a Hughes modem, we could carry an NTN modem and have all of those networks be compliant to it. And so we're working on that initiative right now. Seamless Airlines is the market representative to 3GPP on aeronautical, and we have a group headed up mostly by Airbus who's going to launch satellites that can do regenerative payloads in space to support this, so it's a big deal for them. But the idea is that we're going to operate in the KUK frequencies and use an NTN modem to the airplane as a backhaul connection. So it's not going to go straight to your handset. It'll go to the airplane, but it will replace that special modem that's already that iDirect provided for Viasat, or Viasat provided for their other Viasat services, et cetera. It'll just be an NTN modem. So a lot happening on that side. Next slide. So just talk a little bit about Starlink. Starlink has a different way of doing things. They're not afraid to fail. They push the market quickly. It's fail often, I think, is kind of the way they would position it. They've now launched over 10,000 satellites. Well, I think they've launched over 11,000, but they have 10,000 in service right now, which is a stunning number, and they're not done by any means. And they haven't even got Starship going yet, which is going to allow them to launch much bigger satellites than what they've been launching. So they're a force to be reckoned with. They have a big initiative around direct-to-device. If you go to the next slide. So Novaspace, says that a direct-to-device over the next few years in sum is over $100 billion opportunity. We're starting to talk big numbers now. And in order to support that, you have to have spectrum. And so spectrum becomes the big issue for your ability to serve this marketplace. Starlink bought SpaceX. SpaceX, Starlink, same thing. They bought $17 billion from Dish just for spectral rights, which was, that's a really big number for spectrum. $17 billion is just a big number in general. And then you may be aware that SpaceX is now in the process of an IPO, and their initial position on that IPO is $1.75 trillion. and they're planning to raise something like $50–60 billion out of that raise. So a large amount of cash is starting to be built up in this market. And this next slide, before you put it up there, I am no way suggesting that Inmarsat, Viasat, or Iridium have any desire. They're 100% committed to aviation, and that there's no issue or question in the future that they're going to support you. But go ahead. The issue is the dollars. So Globalstar, Amazon has just now made a deal to buy Globalstar for $9 billion. That's at least what's reported. That's a pretty big number for Globalstar, frankly. And they're not doing it to buy the Globalstar satellites. They're buying it to get the Globalstar spectrum. There are two other narrowband, L-band frequencies that could be very useful in this world, and one of them is owned by Inmarsat, and the other one's owned by Iridium. Viasat does have an initiative forthcoming with Space 42 to put out a new constellation in support of direct-to-device. I'm sure that the plan is to use that in concert with their safety services, so there's no issue around that. Iridium, they already are a low Earth orbit constellation, so they're kind of already there, and again, they're fully committed to it. But just note the market caps for those companies are well under $10 billion. And so when you're talking about companies as large as what we're talking about, and if somebody says, hey, I could really use that spectrum, they could potentially disrupt the world a little bit for us. So I just want to plant the seed to be aware, not suggesting anything is happening. I don't want this to go the wrong way, because nothing is happening right now. But over the next 5 to 10 years, it could be that we could see perhaps one or two of these networks getting acquired and repurposed for direct-to-device. And so I think from an aviation standpoint, we should be always what's the term? Aware, diligent, prepared. Don't be blindsided by these things. So I think we have to be cognizant that connectivity is evolving, and that what we have envisioned for now to the end of time might not necessarily be the right answer, and that we should be at least open to looking at what other things we might be doing. So please don't go writing any notes about how I stood up here and said Inmarsat's abandoning aviation or Viasat's dropping it. I'm not saying that.
I should delete that.
Yeah, please. I don't want that to because I believe they're fully committed. I absolutely do. But when somebody comes to you and says I'll give you $20 billion for it, the shareholders are gonna certainly have some interest in that. So next slide. So multiple KSAT networks. You have to have, in order, a KSAT network, KSAT is KU or K-band satellite communications. By the way, in the future, we do see QV band perhaps coming towards airplanes, and also free space optical could come towards airplanes. Those are probably out there in that 8 to 15 year horizon. So when I talk about KSAT, that's the technology we have today, but there's probably some additional coming forward. You need a modem, you need an antenna. And the antenna has to have, of course, a beam that can support that. If you want to support more than one network on board the aircraft, you need an additional beam, whether that's a multi-beam antenna or two separate antennas, and you need another modem, because each beam requires a modem in itself. And so, go ahead, next slide. So we're starting to see a duality enter into the marketplace. It started about 2 years ago, I would say, maybe 3 years ago, with the idea of a multi-orbit antenna. This is an antenna that has a single beam, but can operate with a GEO satellite, or it can operate with a LEO satellite. In this case, it's operating with GEO and OneWeb. And Stellar Blue, now Galat, marketed that. SES and Panasonic both sell that antenna in the fleet, and I believe there are over 600 installations now. There's also a variant for business aviation. Now, that antenna can only use one or the other network. So you can have it like on the LEO network all the time, but if LEO doesn't work for you, you switch to GEO, or you can have it on the GEO network, and if it's not working for you, you can switch to LEO, but it's not both at the same time. But there are actual legitimate dual antenna solutions coming forward. The first one that really entered the marketplace was a combination of a ThinCom antenna with a Hughes antenna. ThinCom providing connections to geostationary satellites as well as forthcoming Telesat, and the LEO, the small antenna, was for OneWeb. So now you have in one assembly, about this big, this much of it is doing, let's say, your GEO work, and about this much of it is doing your LEO work, and they're operating exactly at the same time. So you've got two actual networks up and running at the same time that can deliver service to you. Viasat has a electronically steerable array dual beam coming forward, so that's a single antenna that can put two beams up at the same time. Panasonic is selling an Intellian antenna for OneWeb that bolts on in addition to your GEO antenna. So if you're flying around with a GEO antenna, you can install this Intellian antenna on the side of your airplane, on a different part of your airplane, and have two complete antenna systems on board. There's Airbus Cesium dual beam receive, that Sidewinder antenna. They're coming up with a dual beam receive. Dual beam receiving, you can put two beams up on the receive side, but only one for transmit. So it's good for handoffs and for broadcast TV. Starlink, mind-blowing decision. They came out of the gate installing two separate antennas on the airplane. On the A380, they're going to install three antennas on the airplane, which is, I've been involved very much with, and part of why I'm here is to help inform me on what we should be doing on our airing subcommittee in developing standards for provisions for KSAT, is what's that configuration. Right now, we only have one place to install antennas. You could put two antennas, but it's just in one place. Starlink is installing antennas in different places along the airplane. I don't think that's a sustainable solution. It's a nice way to kind of get into the market quickly, but we think like in that wave 2 disruption phase, we're going to start to see those antennas being installed side by side in one location. I came across this behemoth at the SAT show just a couple of weeks ago. My colleague is standing next to it. When we talk about the radome looking like an upside-down bathtub, we didn't really mean that it should be an upside-down bathtub, but that's exactly what it looks like. There's no way that that's a viable solution. It's way too tall. It doesn't need to be that tall. What's notable about that antenna is it's two apertures, a transmit-receive aperture for KU, a transmit-receive aperture for KA, and they're both dual beam. So it's a 4-beam solution, 4 independent beams that covers both KA and KU. That is like the long-term dream solution for airplanes. If Boeing or Airbus wants to build the airplane one way, they can install something like that, and then the airline can decide whatever service provider they want. They can just configure it. So we're starting to see this come into the marketplace now. It's not tomorrow, okay, but it is coming, and the technology is supportive. I think this group very much appreciates. We talked a lot about it, independence and diverse, and I guess when you think about it on the airplane, independent solutions like 2 HFs, so they're fully independent, no common mode failure on board the aircraft, divided. Starlink has independent solutions right now. When they're installing 2 antennas on the airplane with their own, they're a stack. It's an antenna and the access points all kind of comes as a package. And so when you have 2 of them, you got a couple access points driving this one, and you have a couple access points driving that one. I think now they're starting to do a little load balancing between the 2, but effectively those are fully independent from each other. So if one falls over, the other one still works, but they're not diverse. They still are operating independent on the Starlink network, and every network has its areas where it struggles. Also, we've had Starlink outages. There haven't been many, but there have been Starlink outages. So it doesn't matter if you have 2 or 3 Starlink antennas on your airplane. If the network goes down, you're out of luck. If you're operating in an area where, for whatever reason, the area is very congested, two terminals might not save you. So diversity becomes a really big factor here. And just as we talked about with Inmarsat and Iridium, sort of the same idea is that you can't put 2 Inmarsats on and feel good about it. well, some people would feel good about it, but I think, ultimately you'd be worried about it and Inmarsat going down. And by the way, we had reported at the last PARC, some interesting stories about Inmarsat outages. Anyway, so these things do happen. Okay, so another thing that happened in the marketplace is the modems that support these KSAT systems traditionally have been installed in a box we call the Modman, modem manager. It's down inside the airplane, and we have coax cables that go up to the antenna and drive it. We now have integrated modems within the antenna. We call it a modem in the outside antenna equipment, MIO. Modem in the Modman is MIM. And so that's a very interesting proposition. It makes that antenna sort of single purpose. You can't use it for anything else because it's kind of tied to that modem now. But it's also very compact. It also creates some challenges for us because before all of the data came through those coax cables, but now the data's got to come through an Ethernet interface, and we didn't really wire it up for that, so we have some challenges for it. But in any case, we have the what we're calling the expanded function Modman, which will house modems. But if you have antennas that don't have any modems, or that have the modems outside, you don't need to put the modems in the Modman anymore. And so what could we do with that space? And so we've created the same form factor, the same edge connector, but no modems inside, and we're calling it a connected application server. So the Modman, connected application server, from an outside perspective, they look the same. But on the Modman, most of the design is towards supporting those modems, which are power hungry, which deprives the processing capability within the server. It can only do so much. The connected application server doesn't have that drain, and so it can have a lot more processing and storage capability. So it's a springboard for a lot of other things. One of them is, by the way, being the traffic router. If you have two networks, somebody's going to take the data in and decide how to split it between those, through packet inspection or other methods. There's also other kinds of applications. So the connected application server has kind of a whole new world of opportunity, much beyond not necessarily SATCOM, but it's starting here. So if you have modems inside, you have to have a Modman. If you have modems outside, you have to have a connected application server. And the reason you need that is we get one data pipe from the antenna with all the data in it, but we have to distribute that data to different domains of traffic on board the aircraft. So we have interfaces for passenger connectivity, for in-flight entertainment connectivity, and for aircraft information services. 3 different domains. We actually have 3 different Ethernet ports that are segregated in order to do that distribution and to keep them segmented from each other. So the connected application server and the Modman serve that routing distribution purpose. So even if you have the modem outside, you still need a connected application server on the inside. KSAT has been, and I think to the end of time will be, a level E COTS service. It's a very complex system. There's lots and lots of equipment that's not on the airplane that make up that network. This has always been an issue with connectivity when we talk about the components that are on board the aircraft, when you look at the components that are necessary to deliver a service. So we focus on certifying the airborne piece, but it's like the tip of the iceberg for what a SATCOM system is involved in. There's a lot of technology that's not on board the aircraft that has to be taken into account. We're a very small market to companies like Starlink and others. They're not going to develop necessarily bespoke hardware and software to this level to meet higher design assurance levels. So just set it aside, the idea that we can take these KSAT systems up to anything beyond level E. They're stuck in level E. That's just where they're going to live. Okay. This is a slide. I'll probably spend a half hour, and we could have a conversation on this slide for a half hour, I'm sure. I put it together a few years ago, and it's so far it's held up, but I've never put it in front of this group, so I don't know what you all think of this. But the problem is there's different terminologies that float around that confuse people. First is route service versus off-route service. When we talk about AMSS versus AMSRS, when we talk about route, we're talking safety services, off-route, non-safety services. That's on the bottom of there. And then we have passenger-oriented services and non-passenger-oriented services. And then across all of that, we have Ethernet domains, passenger-owned device domain, the in-flight services, we have aircraft information services, and then we have aircraft control domain. So the aircraft control domain has generally been held to be the safety service domain. Aircraft information services domain has been the non-safety avionics domain. So the EFB lives in the AISD. It does not live in the ACD. ACARS lives in ACD. So when we talk about these splits, that's kind of at the domain level. But then you also have the communications that occur over those Ethernet domains. And this is where you get to public correspondence, administrative communications, operational communications, and air traffic services. And air traffic services and operational communications generally are considered safety, administrative and public are considered non-safety. There's a little bit of a fuzzy line in that. You'll see the ATS kind of blurbs away because there's another attribute which is kind of come into this, and that's performance-based communications. And the only, that at least from my perspective, and I could be mistaken on this, but the only communications where we have a performance mandate is with CPDLC and ADSC, where we have RSP and RCP. So air traffic services, a good portion of those messages have a performance mandate. There are ATS messages that don't. Like, I don't think context management has a timer, for example. So there's ATS datagrams that are passed that aren't necessarily subject to RCP 240. That's why that line blurs a little bit off of the performance side. So just wanted to, I know this vernacular, it confuses everybody, myself and as well, and I tried to put this together to help, kind of level set everybody's idea of where that all goes. We have the HICON, Hyperconnected ATM, HICON initiative moving forward already, which is using the KSAT system in supplementary mode for offloading, if you will, the narrowband L-band networks, but the L-band network stands ready to step in the event that the KSAT system isn't able to perform. So that's a great first step, and that's something we have to continue doing. We have to get comfortable with using KSAT. But if you kind of go beyond that, where could we go to look at KSAT as being a required radio service? Right now, it's a supplement. It has no MEL attribute or anything like that. And I think the only way forward on this, and that's the crux of this discussion, is that we need 2 KSAT systems on board to get there, and they have to be fully independent. And they have to be diverse. So think, and I don't want to pick players, but think, Starlink and OneWeb or Amazon and Telesat or whatever mix you want, but 2 completely different networks on board the aircraft, each having their own antenna, each having their own, obviously modem, and each having their own server. And that's on the AWC side, that's what I'm trying to work out, because we can actually build the system with one server, but it doesn't get you fail-off capability. So the question is, should we be provisioning airplanes for a second server in order to support that diversity, that fail-off capability? And that's the big question. If there's an opportunity to take benefit of it, then I think we'll move forward as an industry in provisioning for that. But if there's a cold shoulder to turn towards this, then what's it? So to have this diversity, go ahead to the next slide. I've already covered this. We have to have this ability to distribute the signal across the different domains. That's why we have that extra server. I'll say there is one little, I'll just mention there's one issue with this, and that is if you have 2 independent systems and you have a client that wants to talk, do we bring both interfaces up to that upstream system and let them choose up there? Or do we provide a routing function that will arbitrate between them on their behalf? If we provide that, then that becomes a choke point that has to have elevated design assurance. So the routing between the 2 channels, if we depend on it, either we leave it to the upstream to do it, or we have to develop something in the system that stands alone, if you will, at a higher design assurance level to assure that won't fall over. Yeah, normally the going concept right now is that you would have one server that would normally take all the traffic and it would distribute it between the two radios to kind of load balance between them. If there was a failure, then you would connect to the secondary server. I'm not going to go through this chart. You can, but it's all the different combinations of how we can get there with dual beams and so forth. On the right side of it, you'll see 3 columns for fail-op. Are you fail-op at the antenna level, at the service level, and at the network level? And in order to be fully satisfied, you have to have yes in all 3 of those. And the only ways to get there are with 2 antennas and 2 servers. And 2 networks. That's the only way to do it. Like Starlink, for example, 2 Starlink antennas, 2 Starlink servers, both Starlink. Doesn't work. So, next slide. Okay, I don't want to throw darts too much on this, but I just go ahead and I just want to mention that it'll become obvious in about 3 slides, but what I'm proposing is there a way that we can combine 2 KSAT systems to be as good as 1 L-band system? And then we can say we only need 1 other L-band system on the airplane. So 1 L-band plus 2 KSATs is kind of the solution that I'm looking for. So I was trying to understand what are the requirements on a single L-band system. A single L-band system has a single radio, a single antenna, single network, generally software designed to DAL-D. And anyway, it's a single thread solution. Next slide. We've been talking about the dual active standby. What do you fail? What's the right term for the dual L-band? What do you call it? Diverse L-band or dual dissimilar L-band. Certainly a viable approach, and I'm all for trying to get HF off the airplane. You know, first HF communication was done in like 1908 on a Wright brothers airplane. First time we had a shortwave radio on an airplane. It's 2026, okay? Time to move on. We don't need to keep going with HF. So I'm all for what can we do to get rid of HF. I think this was one of the initiatives towards that. The only issue with this, I'll say, it's a very complex state machine in switching between the two, and I know we're doing everything we can to simplify it, but it is something the pilot might have to be involved in that I think could be difficult. But let it be what it is. This is another way to get there. Go ahead. So we're looking at the dual independent diverse, the top line. This is out of the L-band analysis. So we're kind of going for that top line, but we're using KSAT as the second channel. Go ahead. So here's what I think are kind of the three stepping stones that we have as an opportunity. The bottom one, which I thought we were there, 1 HF and 1 L-band, and I come to these meetings and I walk away more confused and listening to the conversations. I'm not always sure, but I think that's more or less coming into agreement in some manner. The next step would be to take HF off and have 2 L-band systems. And what I'm suggesting is there's another step maybe to have 1 L-band, preserve 1 L-band, and have 2 KSAT systems. So all 3 of those would be equivalent solutions, and that's what I'm kind of pursuing here. So again, we're going to hold on to one of those 2 networks, Inmarsat and Iridium, let them fulfill the first side of it. And then to provide the second side, we would use 2 KSAT systems that were fully independent and diverse. The good news is all of those radios are up and running all the time, so airlines aren't buying for equipment that's going to sit there and just be on standby mode. These will be actually delivering useful services to the airline all the time. So I think that's a big plus for it. KSAT works from gate to gate. Most airlines use it that way. And again, you have to take into account that when you have multiple links on the airplane, somebody up at some point, generally above the radio layer, is making the decision as to where to send the data, which radio is going to send to. That's not really our problem at the radio level, although we can do some load balancing. Okay, so I want to be very clear that what we're talking about is the failure is loss of function that we're trying to deal with. The malfunction modes here, where you have misleading data is handled by the receiver of the data itself. It's not managed by the radio. The radio can try to, make sure it doesn't get changed, but ultimately the responsibility for misleading data is at a higher level. So the only real hazard that we're dealing with in this combination here is loss of function. And so what we have is two independent KSAT systems in combination, trying to provide enough availability to match what one L-band system would be equivalent to. Okay, let's go on.
Please.
Yeah. So here's the leap. Here's where we need regulation action in order to pursue this. I just want to remind people that we made a decision to call the EFB a non-safety function. And have you looked at all the applications the EFB does? They're all non-safety. By definition, it's non-safety. So there are times when we can make rules that it's a policy. It becomes a policy. And so the issue we have here is DO 178 allows for two independent like DAL-D systems in combination can be equivalent to one DAL-C system as long as there's no common mode failure between them. Generally, I think the thinking is DAL-E the failure is one. It's not like 0.1 or 0.01. It's one. So they're failed. Two fails doesn't get you anywhere. When you get to DAL-D, you get like a 10 to the minus 3 credit, and DAL-C you might get a 10 to the minus 5 credit. But DAL-E generally it's like 1, like probability of failure or failure rate. But that's the big issue here. Is in order to fulfill the objective of providing protection against a minor loss of function. That minor loss of function normally would mandate a level D architecture. We don't have that, and I don't know that I would argue a single KSAT should be promoted to meet that. I think that's a leap too far. I'm not suggesting that would be a bad thing, but I don't think I think there's too many people who object to it. But I think two independent KSATs with no common mode failure between the two and full independence in the hardware, I think you could make an argument that there's no common mode failure.
Peter, on your last step of your vision, you see two KSATs and one L-band. But the KSAT installation there that requires like a power amplifier because usually has more throughput, more bandwidth.
Right.
So on that vision, on the last step, I don't see the 5DAC solution replacing the second L-band by one KSAT based on the trouble that you have a KSAT solution that would have just the bandwidth that we need for the 5DAC. Not as much for the passenger with the power amplifier and all the complication of the KSAT architecture. Do you see that in your vision as well?
Okay, so first off, each antenna would have their own power amplifiers. There's no common mode between the two. So you're getting the full bandwidth on either channel. And pardon me, we're talking about radios that are going to be delivering very soon a gigabit per second on board the aircraft. A gigabit per second. So I would argue a single channel would certainly meet the needs of an individual airplane without any real restriction. Remember the L-band system, Certus is like at 100 kilobits per second, something like that. I'm talking a gigabit per second. Yeah. I think the one thing we've got is bandwidth. That's the one thing that the KSAT systems have an enormous amount of.
But in terms of size and power, do you really see a KSAT replace an L-band system in the future?
We can install a KSAT system right now is about like this on the LEO size, and we can put two of them in one assembly that we already have provisions for on the airplane. So we can fit them. ARINC 791 provisions allow for that. So companies like Airbus and Boeing are already installing multiple Starlink antennas in one location. So it's already there. And you saw that one picture I had where I had the four apertures. That's what we're talking about. Is we have that kind of room to do that kind of an installation. Um, Did I get through the other? Let's see. Yeah, so I just ran through some numbers. Again, we're not talking about message. We're not talking about message integrity. That's handled by the receiver of the data itself. Authentication, again, it's who's managing the tunnels, not us. And the issue, I think the real challenge is presenting independent interfaces to that upstream router, or whether we have an intermediate router that combines the two into a single interface to upstream. That's the part that I'm not sure where we'll end up. Okay, almost done. Well, I think I probably said this. Airlines are becoming more and more dependent themselves on these capabilities. That connected application server, we're going to see, I think, a big lineup. If you followed the EFB and the transition to when the EFB became an iPad, and we had the non-safety rule put into place, it opened the door for third-party software developers to develop applications for aviation that had a very low on-ramp, a very low barrier to entry, because lots of people know how to design apps for iPads. And so you go to the users forum, or you go to the FAA advisory circular that lists all of the applications that are available. There's over 100 different kinds of applications. It's huge. And I know the pilot community is especially well positioned to think about these applications in those long cruise legs. It wouldn't be nice if we had an app to do this or that. We're trying to do the same thing for the airline. So we're trying to build a marketplace similar to what the EFB has for the pilot, for the airplane. And so the connected application server, it uses containerized software architecture, so it's very easy to bring software to the airplane in that software environment. We're working with EFB to gain access to the ID information base, so that you can tap into all the different data sources on board the aircraft, and as well you have connectivity and storage on board. So we're expecting kind of forthcoming a new world, especially for airlines, and being able to deploy their own applications on board aircraft to serve their needs with a very low barrier of entry. Good. And then just have to acknowledge that time doesn't stand still. Things are still changing. So, space-based VHF voice in particular is a really interesting new capability that might come out. We've been living with space-based ADS-B out surveillance for some years now. How much have we really used ADS-B in? Really, there's a lot that we can do with that. We're dealing with issues around GPS, GNSS jamming and spoofing, and so we're starting to look at other methods for delivering PNT services that sort of overlap into COM. And then I mentioned the whole NTN initiative, which is really driving a kind of a whole mindset of this. So on top, and I mentioned Q, V-band, and free space optical also kind of out in the future. So it just keeps going. I've been in this business a long time, and it just keeps going. It's amazing. And I think I have just one more slide after this. Oh, well, before I do have one more after this, but to your point, what is the ask for this group? There are two big questions that really haven't been put to bed. And one of them is there still is some concern about using non-safety spectrum, AMSS spectrum, for safety services. And I'm not an ITU, lawyer or legal. I don't live in that world. But by and large, the point of route services was to give you priority over that spectrum, that you could demand everybody else step back if you have any kind of interference, that you have freedom to it's a design attribute, so to speak. We've tried to move away from design attributes and towards performance-based attributes. So I personally don't think that we should fear using AMSS spectrum for safety application. We just have to know that we can't use that safety application as a mechanism for demanding interference protection. So we're left our own devices to make it work, and that's where the performance-based comes through. This is where HICON is really good, because we'll start to get our feet wet into how well it performs and so forth. And the second question, which maybe you've given us a way out of, is can we get the regulators, particularly the certification side of the house, to agree architecturally that 2 DAL-E's in this circumstance could meet a DAL-D loss of function minor hazard. And the last slide I have, that's finished that. I just wanted to quickly say that I am part of the Seamless Air Alliance. We're a nonprofit organized around promoting in-flight connectivity. We have a number of working groups that you might be interested in. One of them, our Architecture and Interoperability Group, which is building out a 10-year vision, which where a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about has sort of come out of. We've just started, and that one is headed by Airbus and Boeing. The second one, Connected Aircraft Operations Group. We're appealing. We have just started the group, so Luc Embergère, who you may have met, and also Arnaud Tener, who's on the call sometimes, are chairing that group. It's a brand new group. We're trying to build out a place to talk about non-passenger applications. Our host group is working on that containerized architecture, and we're working with the AWC, Electronic Flight Bag Subcommittee, to promote that. And then we also have an airline forum, a technical forum, a modem group, and an NTN expert group. So we have a lot of activities going on there. Everybody's welcome to join in, but there is a price of entry. Unless you're an airline, airlines get in for free. So if you're an airline and you're interested in operational stuff, please reach out to me. We'd love to have you be part of the conversation. We only meet, those groups meet once a month just for an hour. It's always online. So it's not a big burden.